What's the dumbest rule your school ever enforced? You had to wear your ID around your neck on a rope thing. Then the choking started. If you throw snowballs, you get a 1-day suspension. The first long weekend after a snowfall, everyone would throw snowballs to get an additional day added to the long weekend. Candy canes were outlawed because you could sharpen them to a point and use them as a shiv. I went to school in rural Washington. We definitely weren't somewhere that shankings were to be expected. My school had 3 staircases along a very long corridor. We were banned from using the middle staircase because it got overcrowded. The ban was lifted once they realized it only made the other 2 staircases just as crowded. Not being allowed to wear hoodies, jackets or sweaters that lacked the official school logo. I was a high school teacher for several years. Both buildings I worked in were freezing, and having admin pull students out of my classroom during a 50-minute period and giving them detention instead of letting them learn is cruel and completely unnecessary, in my opinion. Elementary school principal banned talking at lunch. If you were caught talking or even signing to someone, you had to go sit by yourself on a folding chair with no table. There was once my mom came to eat lunch with my older sister and I. The principal was like, "Oh, you should go eat out in the hallway with your daughters." And she was like, "Nah, I'm gonna sit here with my daughter and her friends and talk to them and enjoy their presence." Usually if a parent came for lunch, the student could invite one friend to join, unless you had siblings. Then it was too many people, so you couldn't invite a friend. Anyway, one of my older sister's friends whispered to my mom that she was going to move so she wouldn't get in trouble for talking. This was a 9-year-old. You can only use 3 squares of TP. That if you say, "Do anything back to your bully," it becomes a mutual conflict and isn't bullying. So if they start calling you slurs and making you feel bad every day and you call them stupid once or twice, the school probably won't help. Also, dress code required school-branded hoodies. They were $50. If you wore a non-school hoodie, you got in-school suspension. The new principal made a morning roundup rule where anyone arriving to class after the last bell had to go to the cafeteria and listen to a lecture about not being late for class. This took about an extra 15 minutes, making the students even more late to class than they would have otherwise been. Needless to say, everyone hated it, even the teachers. That principal didn't last long. After 9/11, my school instituted a zero-tolerance policy on bullying and violence. What 9/11 had to do with bullying? I don't know. Anyways, Halloween 2001. I dressed up as the guy from Clockwork Orange. He carries a cane around. The principal pulled me aside, told me walking around with a cane could be a weapon. Therefore just walking with it is an act of violence, and suspended me for a couple of days, telling me that after 9/11, we don't mess around with that kind of stuff. Edit. This happened in Quebec, in a small town. I got Saturday school for missing a day of classes when I was 16. Seems reasonable, except I missed to go complete my US citizenship and officially become a citizen alongside my mom. It took us 12 years to go through the legal process. By the way, whole other issue. I had a note from my mother as well as a signed official federal form they give you to explain to school, employers why you were absent. Apparently the only acceptable absence excuse was illness. I got punished for becoming a citizen. I was sent to the principal in elementary school for getting a drink of water out of line. As in, we walked down the hall in a formation and we had designated water drinking stops. To this day I still remember the principal asking angrily, "Well, what if everyone started getting water without permission?" And I still don't have an answer. No beads. Apparently they thought beaded jewelry was gang-related? It wasn't really the rule that was dumb, but the reason for it. In my last year of high school, the school issued a rule that all students had to wear student IDs. If you didn't, you had to immediately go and pay for another ID. While you can see how many students may have saw this a way to skip class, the reason for this was the school shootings that happened the previous year. The reasoning was that it would be easier to spot who is a student and who is not a student to then see who has malicious intent, except that most shooters were students. So, we were not allowed to have facial hair at all, like to the point where the principal would walk around during lunch with razors and shaving cream and do stubble checks. Absolutely ridiculous, and he would send tons of us to the bathrooms to shave during lunch, no matter how small the stubble was. We once had a rule that we could only go to the bathroom during class. Not in the breaks, only during class. Went to school during the time where health and safety suddenly started going crazy. They introduced a no contact under any circumstances rule, i.e. no touching another person. We were like 6 or 7 years old. Suddenly one day, not only is tag suddenly illegal, but they actually enforced it. I remember one day like 70% of the school's population was pulled off of the playground and made to sit on the floor in the hall, for the crime of just playing the games that children play. Playing cards at lunch was prohibited because it promoted gambling. If we didn't see it happen, It didn't happen. All it did was train bullies to be really good at keeping their voices down and being aware of their surroundings so they could avoid doing sit within a teacher's line of sight. It meant if you were ever outside of a teacher's vision range you were still fair game for heaps of abuse. And if you tried to report things that teachers didn't see then the teachers treated you like you were making up bullshit. It also didn't stop teachers from enforcing double standards, like believing reports from their personal favorites even when they didn't see it happen, since they could just claim they saw it happen if it was contested. That school was basically a training facility to turn bullies into stealth experts. In grade school, we weren't allowed to play on the playground equipment when it snowed. Eventually, we weren't allowed to play with snow or even go near it. I got in trouble for sitting in snow. This was in Minnesota where it snows half the year. Recess basically consisted of milling around the blacktop for 30 minutes. Can't be standing around in groups more than 4. Gang mentality. Banned all backpacks, bags on campus. Students were expected to somehow carry everything they needed in hand. This was especially challenging if you had a non-ideal locker placement. So many. You weren't allowed to wear a coat or a backpack. Always freezing with tons of books. No card games at all. 5 minutes between classes. Sprawling one-story building barely leaves time to pee. I got in trouble for humming to myself in the bathroom and told I was disturbing another class. Closing boys' toilets. Because some cunt was stealing toilet paper. When school staff announced this stupid rule, some students actually threatened to sit on the tables then. You have to wear your tie all the way home. Some sad bastard teachers would stand on the main road away from the school and try to hand out detentions in presumably their own time. We weren't allowed to wear thongs. I don't know how they caught people who did TBH. My friend is an administrator at a private school in NJ and the faculty has to sign in and out of the bathroom using Google Sheets. 9 a.m. 10 minutes. MF. Many years ago when The Simpsons first came out, my school banned Bart Simpson t-shirts that said, "Underachiever." It just sent the wrong message to students, so I wore my, "I'm Bart Simpson. Who the hell are you?" t-shirt instead. Until they banned that one too. Girls weren't allowed to show their ankles. The dean had a pack of socks in her office she would give the students and make them wear. Only girls though. This was the 2000s. Locked the only boys' bathroom because someone wrote on the wall in Sharpie. It wasn't even anything rude or inappropriate either. It was just the word, "Hi," or something like that. Didn't unlock the door until one boy wet himself and parents threatened to sue. They outlawed bracelets because there was an article in a magazine somewhere saying they advertised what sexual acts you were open for based on their color. Then someone tried to outlaw wristwatches for the same reason. No slow dances at the prom. Not really a rule. But the toilet paper holders are outside of the stalls on a wall. So you have to calculate before taking a sit how much you need and hope that it was enough. Took all the doors off the men's room bathroom stalls because of vandalism for 2 months. Zero tolerance just means that if someone starts a fight with you, you fight back as hard as you can. You're going to get suspended for defending yourself anyway. Might as well make it worthwhile. If you were caught on your phone they'd take it until the end of the week. You'd get it back at 3:30 on Friday. Parents went mental and a few even came together and sent bills through for part of the phone bills. They ditched that rule after 2 weeks. Edit. Phones were kept overnight in the school in the office until that Friday if they were confiscated. No safe or anything, just in a plastic box. No getting it back at the end of the day. You just had to go for days without a phone, even at home. Just in case there's any confusion around that law. We were not allowed to put our coats on until we were outside. During winter when we would have a storm, we had to go outside in the rain to put our coats on or face receiving a detention if we put them on in the corridor. When I was in junior school, UK boarding school in the 80s, we were not allowed to say okay as it was considered slang and not befitting the young ladies and gentlemen that we should aspire to be. For context, junior school covered ages 5 to 13. We also had to have a comb and a handkerchief on us at all times. On top of that, we weren't allowed to have our hands in our pockets because it looks slovenly. No unnatural hair colors, except for Lily, who dyed her hair the school color, maroon. It was dark enough to argue it was a weird red, brown, but it was clearly maroon and I think she got away with it because it was school spirit. I was wearing a regulation uniform jacket in a classroom during winter that had no heating. The teacher demanded I remove my jacket and I refused because I was cold. She sent me to the head mistress. A kid went to the hospital after falling from a wall. Then the school painted yellow lines around the school as a border which the kids weren't allowed to cross, so the teachers had to stand guard and make sure no one crossed it. In high school, hair length on men and stubble. Look. A bunch of 15 to 16-year-old guys are going to have a bit of stubble no matter how thoroughly we shave. Forcing us to go to the principal's office to dry shave nearly daily is frocking absurd. We had to sign a waiver before prom stating we wouldn't dance. Dirty. No one went to prom. Yo-yos. Somehow it became a thing in high school and, well, eventually they got banned. Dildos were banned. The school never thought they would have to print those words. You would think it was a given. Until a senior bought 100 dildos and snuck them around the school every day for 2 weeks straight. After 9/11 they made us wear school IDs on our shirt or hanging from a lanyard around the neck. For some reason they decided it would be smart to also put each student's medical history on the back. Mine just had nosebleeds written in cursive. My friend nearly got suspended for wearing a trench coat. It was the late 90s. Probably didn't help that he had long hair, was shy, and weird. Dumbest rule. Zero tolerance for fighting. This meant both the kid who started the fight and the kid who got beat on were both suspended. If the kid who got beat on just took it, he was just sent home for the rest of the day. If he dared to fight back, he was suspended for a week just like the kid who started the fight. Here's the truly stupid part. The school administrators couldn't explain how this led to more brutal fights. My middle school tried to enforce a stop technique. If you were being bullied, you must raise your right hand and say, stop, in a stern voice. If you didn't, the bully wouldn't get in trouble no matter what they did because the bully didn't know any better. I literally got the shit beat out of me once, including a bloodied nose and lip, and they let the frocker off the hook because he was just horseplaying. And didn't know I felt bullied cause I didn't use the technique. You ever try asking a middle schooler politely to stop? They will just make fun of you and bully you more. They banned plain red and plain blue shirts. In high school, the supervisor told the prefects and head girls to break up girls hugging in the hallways. I went to an only girls' school and teachers discouraged girls from hugging each other. Apparently they thought that it encouraged lesbianism. SMH. No fighting. Enforced by punishing the kids who were getting hit. No hot drinks. Rumor said it was because the principal burnt himself while drinking something so he banned it. Girls were not allowed to wear cycling shorts under their PE skirts. They wanted us to wear these dark green PE pants. Basically just underwear, and it was gross. My year protested. We said shorts or nothing and they backed off. This was 20 plus years ago and it's totally different now. Girls wear what they want for PE. My high school decided to ban women's athletic shorts one day, which was ridiculous for many reasons. The next day every girl showed up in athletic shorts and the rule was removed by second block. You weren't allowed things like chocolate bars or basically any unhealthy snack in your lunchbox, but they then sold double chocolate chip cookies and iced buns in the canteen. Students must keep their hair short. You could only go to the bathroom twice a day, once in the morning and once in the afternoon. Mind you, this is from 8 to 3 and you had to get a new pass every week and keep it the whole time or you couldn't use the bathroom. Edit. This was Prec 8th grade. We actually had a dealer who would make fake passes, so they had to start color coding them. They got rid of this rule a month before I graduated. Edit 2. My new high school has a just go policy, and they have no issues. I'm loving it lol. Edit 3 lol. They actually encourage drinking water, at least half your body weight crap, and would have times to drink water from the many water fountains. The hypocrisy. L. My primary school had this weird obsession with safety. When we played dodgeball, the boys had to throw with their non-dominant hand while the girls got to throw full force, and we could get detention for going where the teachers couldn't see us. But the worst rule by far was that we weren't allowed to run on the playground. I'll never forget the time my teacher literally said, "The playground is no place to run. Clear liquids only." Some kid brought in Gatorade mixed with alcohol of some sort, so in effort to combat it afterwards they wanted us to only drink clear liquids out of clear containers. As if vodka and white rum don't exist. At my kids' elementary school, students had to smile while walking in the hall. We weren't allowed to have personal drinks in classroom unless we had doctor's note. One particular professor at my university would lock the door a minute after class began. If you had to leave to go to the bathroom, you couldn't get back in. Somehow this ancient fossil is still teaching and pulling similar shit. It was a year-long battle. It showed that the administration wasn't all that smart in wording rules. First was, no gang clothing. Not one person admitted it was for a gang. People just happened to like a certain team. Second was, no hats. Unless religious. You would have never guessed that so many became religious overnight. Finally, no head coverings. That one finally stuck. But it wasn't without issue. Try telling the valedictorian that her head covering wasn't allowed. P.S. Everyone liked her, and we all had her back when it came time. No farting in class, they would say. If you need to fart, then go to the toilet. But then 9 times out of 10 if you asked to go to the toilet they'd say no. You had to have black shoelaces, no dark blue, no white, no gray, only black. There was also the rule your tie had to be a minimum length. So sometimes one of the assistant head teachers would come in and measure the length of your tie with a ruler. I got detention for pooping more than 10 minutes, but I have served stomach cramps and I asked why and they had no answer. I went to school in the 90s and the school banned us from having pagers. We weren't allowed to share cough drops, and you had to have a note to have them at all. This was apparently because they were considered medication. Guys were free to wear pants in cold days, but girls had to wear a skirt no matter how cold it was. The school made us sign contracts with real punishments if we didn't follow the specified rules for dances. They prohibited the usual stuff you would expect a school would do in this scenario. Where it got funny was how they defined dances that weren't allowed. Among all the strange descriptors they invented to describe banned dance moves, sexual squatting was the one that earned the most criticism. At my high school, girls could not wear sandals or shoes that showed toes because toes make boys think of babies, and babies made boys think of six, and naturally six is the devil. Conservative Christian college. A group of us played Age of Empires one weekend. They didn't like it and called a meeting. Everyone involved got misdemeanors on their records. There was nothing in the handbook about it being against the rules. The only person that didn't get any punishment was the son of the president, even though he was just as involved as the rest of us. Was quite interesting explaining the write-up on my record when I transferred. You got a misdemeanor for what? My school made it compulsory to wear uniform in online classes. Different staircases for boys and girls. Edit. Wow, this blew up. To clarify, this rule was enforced purely with the idea that good boys and girls don't talk to each other. The general air in the school was, don't have anything to do with the opposite gender. I was in this school for only 2 years and coming from other good co-ed school, this really weirded me out. Also, the guys would just act creepy even for a simple, can you please move out of the way? I believe this awkwardness could be prevented if there wasn't such an obvious separation between the genders. Edit 2. It wasn't a religious school, just a general public school. Edit 3. No skirts. The uniform was similar to a salwar kameez. If you turn off your camera, without filling out a ton paperwork first, in online class, the teacher will yell at you. I don't have any teachers who don't lose their crap about it on the regular. One time, my friend turned off his camera for less than a minute to get some water. When he came back, his grade had been reduced from A to B+. The dumbest one I suffered was in the early 90s. My junior high banned all jackets and jacket-like clothing in class because there was a story about how some kids in an inner-city school had brought guns to class in starter jackets. Keep in mind that my junior high school was in a medium-sized college town, not anywhere with an actual gang problem. The school also had a terrible climate control system and was always cold. The rule was really absurd. You couldn't wear jackets or hoodies, but pullover hood-less sweatshirts were okay, as were sweaters. The rule was finally revoked after we had a fire alarm incident in the middle of February that had the whole school standing outside for 45 minutes in freezing weather while the fire department checked for whatever had set off the alarm. No long hair for boys. No black and red type clothing. Example, red undershirt, black overshirt. Black pants, red shirt. No heavy metal band t-shirts or tapes. Anyone drawing pentagrams will be suspended. During the satanic panic of the 80s, we weren't allowed to have "Can You Feel the Love Tonight?" from The Lion King as our homecoming dance theme because it had the words "feel" and "love" in the title. So frocking stupid. No running shoes on the new gym floor. Playing floor hockey barefoot is painful. If found with socks lower than the knees. Warning. 3 warnings. Detention. Needless to say, I got a couple of detentions. Zero tolerance. I got suspended for a week when I got attacked and didn't fight back for fear of being suspended for being in a fight. Turns out you can run down the hall smashing people in the face and everyone you hit gets suspended with you. My high school had coordinates, not a uniform. But they stopped selling the shorts like a decade before I started there. So me and a bunch of buddies tracked down used pairs and started wearing them. Next year, shorts were banned outright. So me and a bunch of buddies on the rugby team started wearing skirts, because the rules said skirts were acceptable, but didn't specify gender. So you had a bunch of guys with hairy legs walking around in skirts. We deliberately hiked up a little to show some thigh. Shorts were allowed again in a week. We suddenly one day weren't allowed to stand in circles during recess because, and I quote, we could be dealing drugs. I will add that for the years prior we had been standing in circles no problem. Next recess, we stood in a triangle. Cue principal going opposite. Next day we stood in a square. Principal kept us inside for a week, and threatened us all with detentions if we did it again, etc. I believe their idea was open-ended circles so they could see what we were doing. Still stupid. Edit. Wow, this blew up. I should add this was in grade 8 in Canada. Middle school. Edit 2. After being told by many to post this on malicious compliance. I did. Then it got removed for being against the rules. RIP. No ripped jeans. They enforced it to the point that when I fell in school, scrapped me knee and ended up needing stitches. Obviously ripping my jeans in the process. They still dragged me to the office to suspend me for the day because me jeans were ripped. I was left there, stitched up, blood drying on my jeans as the vice principal yelled at me that my outfit was inappropriate. Add on. I went to a private school outside of the US. We had a doctor on call so he stitched me up at school. Notified my parents and gave the okay on me going back to class. The VP didn't notify my parents I was getting suspended for the day until after I went home and told them myself. Edit. Fixed wording. Clarifying some things. Women's thighs are not allowed to touch a chair. We weren't allowed to lock bathroom stall doors because we kept skipping classes in them. As protest, about 30 students gathered in as many bathrooms as they could all fit and started singing in choirs while furiously banging on the walls. School staff tried dispersing us but we all human shielded the entrances. Administration eventually gave up and lifted the lock ban. Late 90s. Secondary school. 13 to 16-year-olds mostly. Implementing school socks as part of the uniform midway through the year. Even plain white socks were not allowed. Those blasted things weren't all that durable either. Also, all students who were enrolling in that particular year, I can't remember if it was a male-only policy or not, had to at least have a basic certificate to prove that you could swim. Also strong-armed into attending some outdoor adventure camp thing. Frock you Mr. Jafar. Makes me wonder if you were getting kickbacks from all these things. If you were cold you had to buy a school jacket which were $30. Students and their parents had a $% less than ing field day with this rule. No satanic drawings. What qualified as satanic was anything that teachers or faculty deemed as such, including the Star of David. In the late 90s in my elementary school Pokemon cards were banned. Don't damage school property. Sounds reasonable enough until you get detention for staining a chair after suddenly getting your period. My high school attempted to ban Google from the school computers because it would be too easy to look up harmful things. After a bunch of pushback, they finally just added filters. No clothes from Hollister or Abercrombie & Fitch or you get suspended for 3 days. I went to a private school and those stores had clothes that worked in the dress code guidelines. So, school starts. Then a month after school starts, they decide ANF is too pornographic or whatever and told us we would get suspended for wearing anything from those stores. I didn't have any from there, because they were too expensive. I get making a rule like before people shop for school clothes. For a strict, religious private school. Even though it's silly. Students. Parents refused to go buy new clothes after already buying new ones. A friend of mine got suspended for 3 days for wearing a red polo, because it had whatever tiny embroidered logo was on it. We weren't allowed to use the bathrooms 1 year because someone shoved a plastic bottle down the toilet. So every time we had to go we'd say we needed a drink and then had to dip under the tape blocking the doorway. I spent 2 years in a private Christian school where girls could not wear skirts or dresses unless it covered their whole legs all the way down to their feet. We were between 3 and 8 years old and that rule was meant to make sure boys wouldn't have any sexual temptation. This is not a joke. We lived in dorms when I was in high school because it was in a very secluded place. My friend often joked how we lived like prisoners, because we can't leave the campus grounds even after school unless we get the permission of like 10 people. We eat, sleep and study at very specific hours. Curfew is at 7 p.m., and we weren't allowed to have smartphones like ever. Or any phone with a camera. Every single one of us had a different variation of a Nokia 3310. No spaghetti straps. This was enforced from kindergarten to the end of elementary school. Edit. I just remembered. Each grade had a different section of the schoolyard and they couldn't cross the line separating them. This really sucked because only kindergartens in grade 1 to 3 could use the play structures. My buddy tried to walk away from a fight and got kicked from behind which knocked him out. Because we had a no tolerance rule for fighting, he got expelled. They installed vending machines and later banned pocket change. So if you wanted anything from the machine you had to get it in the morning before classes started, or just get it cheaper in the shop next to the school. Mandatory 10-day suspension for anyone involved in a fight, regardless of details. So basically, A bully could sucker punch you out of nowhere, you fall to the ground bleeding, and get the same 10-day suspension as he does. The amount of people who got screwed out of extracurricular activities and such because someone knew that if they just hit them they could ruin their entire life was ridiculous. It was a stupid rule, and I hope they've wisened up to its abuse in the years since. But being a public school, I highly doubt it. A school in my city banned white t-shirts because they thought kids were being racist. In reality it was because they just beat a rival school in the city who wore all white to the biggest high school football game that year. Went to a Catholic private middle school. Mandatory uniform. Tucked in white shirt, blue pants and black shoes. Guys had to keep their hair short, like men are supposed to. And any facial hair was not allowed. No hoodies, only the school sweater, which you had to buy every year. Girls not allowed to wear pants, only skirts. No matter how cold it got. Zero tolerance for dyed hair or nails. No electronic devices at all. They would take your earphones if seen, even on our breaks. I swear if I was questioning any faith I had, that school sure made me not want to have anything to do with any religious institution ever again. Our school banned Pink Floyd's Another Brick in the Wall, Part 2, because they didn't want kids singing the chorus. We don't need no education. Girls with long hair, below shoulder length, had to tie it up because it distracted the boys. I wish I was joking. No longer in school, but heard from a younger sibling who still attends my old school, that a young student had been getting pretty badly bullied. It would seem that last week the kid had reached his boiling point. He turned to one of the bullies and stabbed him in the neck with a pair of scissors, causing the other child to have to be taken to hospital. Luckily the kid has since recovered. The school's corrective action: scissors are now banned. In elementary school there was a rule that you were not allowed to sit against the walls of the building. Let's say you're not feeling well or you're exhausted and you just wanted to relax with your back to a wall. Nope, can't do it. Go sit in the bark, on the cement, or in the grass. The walls were some of the only shady areas on one of the playgrounds. They gave since changed that rule. Oh, another one was that 2 students from one class were not allowed to go to the bathroom at the same time. You had to wait until the other person came back. I can't tell you how many first and second graders peed their pants because of this rule. Prom was a mandatory lockdown for the night in order to avoid students going to parties after prom. Prom was held at various house parties across town instead. Rubik's Cubes were banned. Not a school rule, but the school had to officially announce it to the student body. The McDonald's across the street made a "no unaccompanied minors" rule because a couple kids had trashed the place one day after school. For a few months' time we weren't allowed to say apple juice because one kid shouted it troughed the class the whole time. At the end of the school day, buses were not allowed to depart until the flag was lowered on the flagpole outside the main entrance and properly stowed. Skirt had to be a certain length. That's not the dumb part. If a teacher thought it was too short you had to kneel so they could see where the hem came to on your legs. Was this a Christian private school where old male teachers were making middle school girls kneel on the floor to check their skirt length? Why? Yes it was. I never wore skirts, so I was spared. But God, I hated that school.